This is the Chinwag Junkie Podcast. I'm your host, Joy Stone. Welcome to another episode.
Podcasts are great, and I think conversations at the end of the day are how people make decisions about important matters. So you can read a book after book after book, but a conversation and the just the whole empathy factor about a real human being saying something to you is far more powerful in many cases, I think, than reading something.
It's not only that. I think it's when you talk to people with opposing views, like you were saying, there's that empathy factor. But I mean, someone that's pushing back on an idea that you have and is really passionate about it and has, again, the empathy and the feeling involved in the argument. There's something about that than reading an opposing view in a book or in a study or something. You can just sort of throw it off to the side and find one that agrees with you. So
completely agree.
Yeah. So I might get you, before we get too carried away, I might get you to do a little intro, who you are and some of your qualifications, because it's as long as my arm. I had a look.
How did I get here? Far out. It's been a long ride.
I bet.
My name's Dr. Cameron Jones. I'm an environmental microbiologist. I do a lot of public health related work, a lot of messaging, a lot of live streams. I have my own podcast. I have in terms of academic qualifications, a Bachelor of Science with a major in microbiology. I then went on and did postgraduate studies in industrial microbiology. And then I went on and did a PhD in the Department of Chemistry, also in microbiology with a focus on fungal biology. And after that, I moved to the maths department at the university and worked on mathematical biology and a lot of very interesting things in the interface between computational biology and mathematics. We had a couple of restructures too many at the university that I was at. I had been doing some consultancy within the university with a gentleman who opened my eyes to indoor air quality and the impact of water damage in the built environment. And he told me a couple of years before we had all these restructures that I was crazy to remain at the university, and there was a lot of public health work related to sick building syndrome and environmental illness and toxicology, which was gaining a lot of public awareness in the United States and in Europe. And from his viewpoint, there was nothing happening in Australia, or very little. And he said, you should leave the university and set up a business and go into indoor air quality and water damage assessment. In any case, eventually I took the leap out of the regular paycheck and set up a laboratory. I now have 2 labs at 2 locations, and we are 10 to 11 years into this. So I love it. I find that providing a one-on-one consultation is a very effective use of my skills, because I actually help people. I don't do as much publication as I used to. Years ago when I was at university, essentially the aim of the job was to publish and then use those publications to seek grant funding. That is a lovely, lofty position to be in, to essentially write for a small audience and seek government funding for your ideas. And essentially it is the epitome of an echo chamber, because the commercialization of scientific research out of a university is undeniably poor and has a poor track record. Even those universities and research centres that are well interfaced with government, there seems to be an inability to commercialise obvious things that can be more effectively done from the private sector. So I'm very happy in the private sector, although I do consult at the National Institute of Integrative Medicine, which is a private, not-for-profit institute which is full of medical doctors, naturopaths, integrative health practitioners of all modalities, and a few scientists like myself. So that is very good because it is superior to working in a university, because all of us have a passion for essentially delivering solutions for people who are unwell. And whilst myself as a microbiologist have excellent experience in terms of illness and infection control and how different microorganisms impact on people, the clinician is absolutely critical in here, because the clinician has those abilities and licenses and skills that I don't have, but I still benefit from seeing a lot of that information. And in a sense, I'm a little bit removed from the patient. So when I see these case file notes and that sort of thing, I know it's a real person. Sometimes I meet them, but I already have a very good understanding of what their clinical situation is. And so when I then go into homes to do water damage and built environment investigations, it's with the view that this person or family or children are already unwell, and that this has been clinically verified, and that this is not just a attempt to pull one over on the insurer to try to get some money for free or something like that. So I really love my job, and certainly with COVID, the dismay that I feel about science in general and public health and correct messaging is really been thrown up in the air, and I'm quite concerned, because I always believed that evidence-based information wins, and that if you can provide sufficient evidence-based information to other people, they will naturally go, hey, you're right, this makes sense. But with COVID over the last 2 years and now going into the third, we're in this insane world where you can bring up a stack of publications that say one thing, and yet then the media will say, oh, so-and-so from here and here says this, that must be right. And so your stack of evidence is completely downgraded because the media soundbite is considered so much more valuable. And so in a sense, my strong interest in communication and direct to video communication, I feel, is more important than ever, because the mainstream narrative is there is no way that this is self-sustaining in the near to medium term, because there has just been so much false information that people can verify that things just don't add up in the real world. And at the end of the day, people might have gone along with a lot of expectations and requests that government has made, but they're not going to do this forever, because people have common sense, and people's common sense is eventually going to take precedence, and people will at some point decide that their health is much more important. Their personal health today is more valuable than trying to protect it down the track. And I think people will eventually become selfish again and say, actually, how does this affect me? And do I believe all of this?
Yeah, so I'm hoping so. I'm really hoping so.
So I'm on the side of freedom, anti-censorship, and evidence-based science. And so, if you wanted a hashtag to represent me, at least for going into 2022, it's hashtag follow the science. If you can prove me wrong, go for it. But if you can't, or there's a 50-50 inexplicability around the protective value of a particular mandate or whatever, show it to us. Let people decide. And, I'm all about free choice. And so that's sort of where I'm coming from.
So I've always been, ever since, okay, let's go all the way back to, when was it? March 2020?
Yep.
I think that was the first time that I said, people should listen to the government for the 2-week lockdown. You know,
Sure. Yeah.
it was all unknown. No one really knew what was happening. We were getting these images out of China and Italy was falling over
Totally
and all
agree
that
with
sort
you.
of stuff, right? But even then, I was saying people should listen to the government, not we have to. It should be mandated. If people, I was still fully for if people wanted to go outside and do normal life activities, they should be allowed to.
Yep.
That's been my message the whole time, and I cannot believe the resistance that I've been given. It's like I'm forcing people into dangerous situations, and I keep explaining myself to people in person, people on Facebook, people on the podcast, that isn't my position. If you think you're in danger, you shouldn't put yourself in that danger. You should be able to do whatever you need to feel like doing, hide under the bed, I don't know, whatever, to make yourself feel safe. But it shouldn't. But you can't expect me to do the same things that you are doing.
Well,
government should be advising. Yeah, government should be advising, but that's about it. You want to follow the advice, great. But if not, then that's on you.
Well, it's interesting.
I think it's easy.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting you say March 2020. Certainly, my family's experience as well. We got around to Easter 2020, and I remember that I was absolutely paranoid about coronavirus and getting it. And when we went to get Easter eggs for the family, I made my daughter put on a half face mask, goggles, everything. I was hyper paranoid. And the reason for that is I had just written the first paper talking about the probability that people who got the very first alpha wave of coronavirus in China, that the correlation with serious water damage and certain regions of China that are known as sponge cities, that are known to be built on severely water damaged areas, that they can't help it, that they use this very elegant town planning and civil engineering approaches to divert the water, and yet they built residential accommodation on this. I knew that this was going to contribute to serious fungal co-infections for people who are already immunocompromised with the first wave of coronavirus. And so I thought, listen, if this is as bad as we see in China, when this comes to Australia, this is going to be a bloody disaster, that we're going to get infected. And obviously I wanted to protect my daughter, but I remember my daughter not even wanting to go into the chocolate shop because she was essentially so embarrassed by the face mask. And I said, listen, you're going to have to get used to this. I put full dehumidifiers into my house to bring down the relative humidity to 50% relative humidity, because there were some really elegant papers that it came out showing that at a relative humidity of 50%, that this would be the ideal humidity level to reduce the transmission probability of the virus within the home. I salted my filters. Pardon?
Sorry, is that still the case? Is that still...
in terms of relative, look, it's a basic physics phenomena, so it would still be valid. In terms of what's happening now with Omicron, I have no idea. I haven't done a search on relative humidity, but I assume it would still, it still applies for other respiratory viruses, so there's no reason that the variant wouldn't. And I remember I salted the filters in my home too, and then we move further and further into 2020. The literature starts changing in terms of all of the positive therapeutics that were available. Suddenly, we've got this massive dialogue about hydroxychloroquine and then ivermectin, and it became very apparent that literature that was clearly available for download on PubMed, that the searchability of this through Google was not as reliable any longer. And there started to be lots of conversations about censorship. And then if you move into the hardcore maths and information theory literature, moving away from medicine and biology and microbiology, infectious disease, and move back into information theory and computer science, suddenly there's dozens of papers coming up talking about alt-right, closing down misinformation, identifying Twitter users by ideology, how to sort at scale social media messages to reduce their diffusion. And I thought that this is an absolute disaster. What's going on here? And in a sense, I certainly started to begin questioning the logic underpinning a lot of the policy implementations. And then at the end of the day, the fact that people's choice for therapeutics over mandates became this massive problem. Why should any single government or cluster of governments suddenly decide that there is only one way to treat a medical condition or health condition, or for that matter, how to fix something? There is always multiple ways to do things and different approaches that have different probabilities of success. And therefore it's up to the person to choose what they want. And so that's sort of where I am coming from. And I too now am classed as an anti-vaxxer, as someone who does not support the mainstream government narrative. And this is very unfortunate because this is just the way things appear for the late 2021, certainly from July on 2021 and into this year. But there is no way that all the people who have decided to require further verification of mass policies are not going to have their voices recognized for the integrity that they bring to the table. And I think that that's something that we can't underestimate as well.
No, definitely not. So you were talking about, people not having the right to choose with their medication, but it's, again, I'm not sure what it was like down, or what it is like down in Victoria, but up here in Queensland, if a doctor prescribes ivermectin, they're instantly looked at. And if it's for anything, what the government calls suspicious, I guess, they can lose their medical license.
Yes, that's right.
That's never happened. Like, a government's never stood in the way of a practicing doctor and their patient for prescribing medication.
Yeah, look, I completely agree. And this is a topic which is off limits with a number of my colleagues as well. Those who I count as friends, I have been incredibly careful not to enter conversations with them so that they don't, in a sense, have to say, Cameron, I just don't want to go here. I already know the position that they're in. However,
it's a terrible place to be at, though.
It's terrible. I have a former staff member of mine who desperately wanted access to ivermectin, who apparently was by good luck, was seeing one of the clinicians in Victoria that has since been suspended. And he was unable to obtain this because that particular individual knew that the attention was on him. And this is just awful, because it's a little bit like saying, if you were to purchase a brand new car and deliberately decide to void your warranty and take your, say, brand new Mercedes or something to an unauthorized repairer, that you can, to go back to the first one and be told that, look, we'll never service you again, just go away, we never want to see you again. So it's crazy that the medical profession and the allied healthcare workers who work with doctors have been just stopped from speaking out and publicizing the fact that they have been censored. And why have they been censored? Because
that's
it's
the
not
big
like
issue.
There's a single way of treating everything.
No.
And
Completely
we're going to
agree.
question why. What is the biggest story here about why?
Yeah, exactly why. But it seems to be coming out. So it's gaining more attention, I guess, with India using it, now Japan using it, some parts of South America using it, all through the middle of Africa. I know they weren't prescribing it for COVID, but it just seems to one of those correlation type things. There's a lot of parasites, and a lot of people are on ivermectin just because, and they weren't affected by COVID very much. With the low population vaccinated, it just seems, like I said, it's not causation, but
look, I agree with you.
It's pretty coincidental.
The only group of individuals that have had some ability to push alternative treatments, alternative practical evidence-based treatments that are written about in some peer-reviewed journals have been your natural health practitioners, naturopaths, and Chinese medical providers. And already these individuals were on the outer of mainstream medicine anyway. So everything that falls under the integrative health care banner is considered somewhat suspect if it offers an alternative to pharmaceutical or surgical intervention as the first solution. And so it is very concerning that there is a marginalization that has increased due to COVID. And now there is in a sense, a cabal of very strong media friendly healthcare providers and physicians and health experts that are called on again and again and again by the mainstream media to push very, very middle of the road conversations, which they're hardly conversations. They're essentially just co-support. So it's terrible.
Yes, it is. Air quality, though.
Yes.
We mentioned it there before. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget.
Yeah.
I'm sure we will move back onto everything. We'll probably cover COVID quite a bit because it's affecting everything. But air quality before COVID in schools, offices, and hospitals, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Sure.
So was this an issue before? They were talking 2019 previous.
Oh, totally. Indoor air quality and outdoor air quality have been a problem for health for decades, in a sense. It is not necessarily just urbanization, but the reality is that so many people live in urban environments, and this issue of air quality is not just the bacteria, yeast, fungi, viruses that are normally found floating in the airspace, but it is all of the other particulate matter, which is traffic exhaust fumes, emissions from light and heavy industry. But also the fact of the matter is that you've got a whole lot of materials, plant matter, and leaf litter, which fragments and shears itself off and is floating around in the atmosphere. All of this is contributing to something called particulate matter. And particulate matter affects people in lots of different ways, because you can imagine that it's a whole bunch of particles or little balls, and they all have a different size class, from ultra small to much larger. And the larger ones often just cause an immediate irritation to your nose or throat when you breathe them in, and you'll have a runny nose, for example, or you'll cough them. But the very fine ones are breathed really deeply into the lungs. And it's exactly like the damage that cigarette smoking causes to people, that this fine particle matter contributes to a range of pathologies. And worst case scenario, it's affecting your cardiometabolic health. What does that mean? Well, essentially, that's your lung health or your ability of your heart to pump blood. And not only that, it can also cross the blood-brain barrier. And there's quite a number of studies that have a connection between poor indoor air quality, accumulation of particulate matter, and, symptoms of Alzheimer's, dementia, all sorts of unwanted neurocognitive problems related to what you breathe in. That makes sense. It's anatomically connected, but it can also affect your heart health as well. And exposure to particulate matter has a significant impact on heart health. And that's a problem anyway. So what do you do? Because you can't sterilize your house. So you've got to look at what contributes in the home to adverse air quality. And you might live, for example, near a road. You may conversely be living in an apartment which is poorly ventilated or doesn't aerate itself properly. So there's a buildup of toxic off-gassing from paints and furniture and that sort of thing in your home. So there's a lot of problems from chemical buildup, particles, and then what are called bioaerosols. And these bioaerosols, like I said, are not just the germs, but just the cell wall fragments and all the tiny little biological proteins that have sheared off larger components of cells that are just floating about. And this is normal, but the reality is, because we live in cities, it accumulates over time and puts a toxin stress onto people's bodies. So, this is a big reality, and indoor air quality is a leading cause of what they call mortality, but also disability adjusted life years, which is contributing to, in a sense, poor health, limiting your ability to participate in normal life, which is, of course, what we don't want. So I could talk to you a lot about this. World Health Organization, in their defense, have done a really good job of promoting indoor air quality and water damage in the built environment. So these peak government health organizations have done some very, very good work around indoor air quality, at least popularizing it, in the sense to say that this isn't something new, but you need to consider it. And they've been very mindful to disengage this from commentary on climate change as well, which is a great thing, because it just focuses on the facts that this is your location in space, in this particular city, in this particular community, and this is the geography of your community, and these are the impacts on air quality. And even in London, there was some elegant research a couple of years ago that showed that tree planting outside the tube stations was able to reduce the coarse and fine particle concentration of people going in and out of the tube every day. So, some really logical things out there. So air quality doesn't need to be a expensive solution, but it's something that people should be aware about. Now,
I remember talking about particulates. I remember seeing a story of some description a few years ago, talking about people running outside or in country locations may not be better for you because of the basically because of the dust. If you're living in rural areas with heavy farming, particularly crops.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah, I thought that was crazy. Like you're outside, you're running around in the country. I thought, oh yeah, that'd be great. But apparently, it's from what I can remember. Like I said, it was a few years ago, but it wasn't as great as you would think.
I concur with you that this is correct. These hidden or unexpected exposures just happen to all of us. We can't avoid them. You cannot sanitize your world or life.
Yeah.
But these things need to be aware of, and it would be, from my view, working in public health, I think we need many more dialogues around sensible things like indoor air quality improvements, rather than telling everyone that everyone's child needs to be vaccinated before they go back to school. And, talking about air quality, there was a very interesting set of publications released by a group called SAGE, here in Australia, which
Yep.
ostensibly look fantastic in that they're talking about the value proposition, the risk-benefit analysis to increasing or improving indoor air quality in schools and offices to protect the public and to reduce the probability that people will come into contact with COVID. But the
Yes.
crazy writing of these authors, they are discussing or claiming that this needs to be done in addition, but not at the expense of full vaccination of all staff and all children. And I find it incomprehensible that someone would be writing a publication about indoor air quality and tether or link that to vaccination at all. They're not overlapping sets. If you wanted to look at this as a maths problem, vaccination and indoor air quality do not go together. They are not complementary or overlapping sets. Now, you can then only conclude that those individuals that make up the peak body SAGE have an overriding interest in supporting the government's push towards vaccinating children and all teachers. And it is highly concerning where on the one hand, the ventilation suggestions are sensible, and yet the corollary to this is that, well, we might do this, but at the end of the day, we just want to vaccinate everyone. And it is a shame because I've done a number of indoor air quality investigations in both public and private schools. And I can tell you that regardless of whether they are public or private, those teachers take indoor air quality very seriously. When teachers make complaints about illness and failure to be able to attend, or child asthma-like symptoms, fatigue, and all sorts of other sick building syndrome type exposure risks, every single one of the teachers that I've met over the last decade have taken this very, very seriously. Yes, they're always concerned about the expense or disruption or the impact on the perception of other members of the school community, but they want to help those teachers. So I understand why the SAGE group recognize that this is a really significant deal, but I can't understand why this also couldn't have been implemented well prior to COVID, because indoor air quality at schools has been a disaster for a long time. There's a lot of schools that rely on portables with very poor insulation and ventilation already that are in a sense not fit for purpose 20 or 30 years later. And so a lot of the issues about school maintenance and hygiene and ventilation should be part of any government's sensible solution to improving educational outcomes for children. So that's something which, and so, yeah, I'm quite a critic of the SAGE group because I just don't get why you need to throw in these red herring arguments into a reasonable working document for schools, because any of the schools without good experience in critical thinking are going to get to the conclusion and go, oh, we'll just wait for vaccination. We won't bother with all of this because it's all a bit too hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's only one answer. Every road leads to it.
Yeah, that's right.
At the moment, anyway. So you're talking about air quality, obviously. You're talking about air quality and it having more benefits than just the immediate that you would think. And there being no, support, so to speak, from government. The same thing goes with fitness and healthy eating.
Totally.
The last 2 years, like every government at every level has in every country has been dead silent on that. Like, the number one risk factor with catching COVID and winding up in hospital is obesity. Yeah. And there hasn't been not a single word on eating well or, getting out and exercising, losing some kilos. And it not only improves your chances with COVID when you eventually get it, because let's be real, we are going to.
We will definitely be exposed to it, whether we get symptoms or are asymptomatic. I agree.
Yeah. But not only with COVID, it's with everything, and heart health is the biggest issue in most Western countries, and simply losing extra kilos that you're carrying around and being physically fit is the best thing you can do for your health, and nothing. Zero.
Listen, I agree that all of the gyms should have immediately been offered a high quality, high efficiency particulate air filters. Should have been offered concessions for cleaning and deep cleaning, call it like whatever you call it, right? Everyone should have been encouraged to maintain a healthy weight, take up a physical exercise of some form. There should have been healthcare concessions for advice on diet, active encouragement, not just download this paid for app from Apple or at your own expense. Government should have been putting their hand up for a recreation of the 2020 and 2021 version of Life Be In It here in Australia. Like, I grew up with these ads, and people need to take personal control over their health, their obesity, their likelihood of having a diabetic type reaction or diabetes that people don't even know they've got. People haven't been able to attend their healthcare practitioner properly, have been too scared. So what about all of those people? These are as you say, the people with comorbidities that are going to have a higher probability of an adverse outcome of any infection, not just coronavirus. And
disease, heart disease.
You can improve the health of a population with COVID. I am stunned that no country, apart from, I believe that there were some great ads from Brazil. I may be wrong about that. One of the countries have done a high-level government ad campaign regarding exercise, healthy eating, and take control of your own health. And I agree with you 100%. And Australia missed the opportunity for that. And, it's never too late. They should turn around and do it now.
For sure.
Rather than penalizing businesses and telling them that if they open their gym, that we're going to shut you down, take your business away, fine you, all this waste of time, bureaucracy, rather than getting to the fundamental basis of how you could improve people's health. And even for those people who have got secret vices that they may not even want to admit to themselves, having a public health campaign would have been just as efficient as having people focus on their mental health. And we need to do this. And as I said, it's not too late, but it's too late for many people who probably did not need to be sickened with COVID or sickened with some other underlying healthcare problem that may not have been addressed in a timely manner because of this whole pandemic and the overwhelming shutdown of service delivery in one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think they should have, like you were saying, with the Life Be In It, I think it should have been the app that the government produced rather than the sign-in app to go into Woolies and all that sort of thing,
You've got to also say that, listen, I when I was at university, I had the opportunity to help work on teams of developing some software. And I can tell you that things that a single individual can do, once you get 4, 5, 6, 7 people working on it, you might get to the outcome, but there are now so many people who are contributing to it that at the end of the day, it takes so much longer to develop something. It is now reduced in scope because the outcome is consensus derived. All the programming is towards what everyone agreed that their role and responsibility would be. Obviously, the government has been planning on some sort of health-related surveillance app-based solution for some time. This certainly didn't get developed out of a government department within a month. It just couldn't have. So the reality
no.
is that this has been considered for some time. And if that was so, then that needed to be clearly messaged to the Australian public that we have a short-term solution which we anticipate is going to allow us to identify nearest contacts that could make you sick. And if we can limit infection, that's a great thing, and that's our hope. And we're going to test this for the next 30 days. But it just unraveled and developed into this, oh, we're going to do it. We've done it. Here it is. If you don't like it, guess what? You're going to get a fine, like a serious fine, not just a parking fine. So I think that the delivery of this from the highest levels has been shit, for want of a better word, just so bad. Pathetic.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I was going to ask you something here. Surface contamination. There it is. Surface contamination. So I remember way back in the start of this whole mess, when they were shutting down all the school playgrounds and park playgrounds and everything like that, saying that COVID could be transmitted from on surfaces. Turned out that wasn't quite right, but a lot of other stuff can. And how dirty is people's surfaces in like their kitchen?
Yeah, it's a great question. Before COVID, surface to mucous membrane, nose, mouth, eyes, they're the dominant ways in which you can transfer an infection that'll be a lower or upper respiratory thing. This was called Fomite Transmission, and it evolved out of healthcare settings where people touched things, or touched their phone or some surface which has been touched by other people who have got nasal secretions or some sort of infectious element which is now remaining alive on the surface because it's been handled by multiple people. So
the flu done this.
Pardon?
So the flu does that. It can, what do you call it? Fomite transmission.
Fomite transmission. So it's
so the flu can do this.
Yes, it certainly can. And a lot of these viruses hitch a ride on particulate matter, and they're attached to moisture containing particles which support them until they evaporate. And so this fomite transmission is very real. I'm somewhat concerned because right at the very, very beginning of this, I too, as I said to you, like with the Easter 2020, I was really concerned about this fomite transmission. And in fact, my team and I, we spent considerable time and a lot of money looking at surface contamination measurement using PCR. And so I'm incredibly aware of the pros and cons of polymerase chain reaction testing because we did it on surfaces. And the first shopping center that we went out to, we immediately got a hit for coronavirus on one of our samples. And by great good fortune, the head of marketing for this American company that had rapidly developed their surface testing kits for the US Navy happened to have a family member out here in Australia and got stuck in, of all places, Melbourne. So when we were setting all of this up, and I rang the company to see, firstly, why there was such a significant delay in getting these PCR swabs into Australia. And he said, well, because the Navy has got all of our inventory. I'm so sorry, you're going to be waiting for another 6 weeks. And at my vision of COVID at that point in time was, 6 weeks is going to be too late. This is going to be over. Like many other viruses, they're going to essentially mutate back to a less virulent strain, or herd mentality, or not herd mentality, sorry, herd immunity is going to take place. So I thought, we really need these swabs. So when I finally got them and we wanted to make sure our setup was perfect, I rang him up and he said, I'm here in Melbourne. And so I said, come out to the lab. I said, I want you to go through everything. And we went right through this whole issue of the temperature cycling and the protocols that they developed and how they did this for ensuring that it would be an accurate, robust test. And he mentioned all the work that they had done in the United States for PCR testing of humans, and the fact that if you got the cycle length too high, that you would get all these incorrect data essentially, and you would essentially amplify minute quantities of the particular protein that you're after, in this case, the spike protein, the coronavirus, and you would suddenly discover it. And so they were very mindful of the fact that for surfaces, they needed a correct protocol, and they did this with the US Navy. So it was really robust work, and I was incredibly pleased and proud to offer this as a service for, at that point, post-validation cleaning and that sort of thing. What do you think the response to this was here in Australia? Absolutely none. No interest whatsoever. No one wanted to test their environments. At that point, there were probably less than 10 publications on fomite transmission of SARS. Every single one of those papers was showing, including the CSIRO, that it can remain viable on plastic and wood and glass and stainless steel at different levels. And even if you can't remember any of the individual, how long it remains viable, everyone remembers 72 hours, or everyone can do a little bit of basic maths and they go, 3 days, that's enough time, I might get sick. Do I think fomite transmission has definitely contributed to contamination here in Australia or worldwide? Absolutely, because fomite transmission is a real phenomena. There is no way that coronavirus decided to behave differently to every other type of infectious agent in the world. So it is a real phenomena. But did we need to get rid of paper currency because of this? Now, so on the one hand, I'm an advocate for the plain fact that fomite transmission is real. I think that, aerosolization into the atmosphere and inhalation is of course the dominant route of acquiring coronavirus. But even the small reality that it is present on surfaces means that you've got to do something about it. But do I think that it was logical to then get rid of currency or push towards digital only? No. In hindsight, I'm very opposed to this. I think that in any democratic society, we need access to different types of currency. And I think that coronavirus has accelerated the drive for a number of elements in society to decide that currency needs to be done away with and everything needs to go digital. And so this is one more reason why the smartphone apps and the contactless payment is encouraged. And I think that it's a bit unfortunate that they have linked something real like fomite cross-contamination with let's get rid of currency, because I certainly understand how that dialogue goes, and I'm mindful of the value that there could be, a connection there, but I'm opposed to limiting traditional currency.
Yeah, me too. I couldn't understand why they were trying to. It seemed like they were trying to scrap money. It didn't make sense. The other thing that didn't make sense to me was the closing the school, the playgrounds down, totally out in the sun and all that sort of thing. It was discovered pretty early on and pretty well publicized that coronavirus almost died instantly when it came in contact with UV light.
Well, that's right. You're right.
That famous quote from bloody Donald Trump where he was trying to get the light inside the body, and what a fucking idiot.
Yeah, well, you're right.
But he was talking. He was on the right track. He was just spitballing like I don't know what you would call him, but anyway, he was on the right track. The coronavirus does die in a UV under UV light. So
it does.
And And I mean, down there in Victoria, I remember not too many months ago, Dan Andrews shut the playgrounds again, and all the kids were at the skate park. That went, the videos of that went viral everywhere. It was crazy. It's still crazy.
I remember this very well. My daughter is 14 now, but certainly for those first 3 years of her life, all parents go to the park constantly. We don't know what to do. Like what do? You wheel your baby to the park. So this is a rite of passage for young families, and I think that experience for elected politicians to suddenly state that something which they may have forgotten the value of this, or the role that these public spaces play in a community, it was over the top. I think too that you mentioned that you understand the role of people who go into people's homes. You said that you have a plastering background. I too, when I go out to do inspections, have to go to people's homes. This issue of where you find a toilet is often at the local park. And I remember the day after the announcement of well, maybe it's the day after the day of announcing the closure of the playgrounds, that I found myself needing to find a park. I found a park, and I kid you not that there was a young mum with her child in a pram who saw me pull up. I happen to have a black car, right? The poor lady must have thought, oh, there's one of those undercover council people, because she was wheeling her child towards the play area. I just pulled up, and she just turned around and left, and all. This type of these mandates create very real changes in behavior, and introducing fear into young families is just wrong. And if they wanted to do that, they need to get the evidence. They need to test 10 playgrounds and prove not just the presence of coronavirus, but prove the infection was caused by the presence. And that's the big issue about fomites, which I didn't mention before, that just because something is proven to be present doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to cause an infection.
And like you're talking about this transmission on surfaces, but like we discussed, when it came out that it wasn't exactly transmissible on the playgrounds and whatnot. But it's happened a lot more than that. But no one has said, "Oh shit, we got that wrong. Sorry."
Yeah, exactly.
We'll backtrack on that a little bit, and go and play on the playground. Sorry, kids. But I mean, it's not just the playgrounds. It's happened a lot, and no one's really sort of said anything. Like, no one's admitted they were wrong.
Well, that's exactly right. And this issue of surface contamination, there's been elegant research done on the value of copper impregnated surfaces for reducing a range of different germs. Why wasn't copper door handles and copper promoted as a natural way of dealing with infections and infectious agents in the environment? Again, these are simple things that no government would have gotten into hot water on scientific grounds promoting. So it's illogical to me that the gross number of people involved in coordinating healthcare outcomes did not take advantage of common sense opportunities that are in the literature and are fully peer reviewed and cause no harm. So it's still mind-boggling to me.
So talking about common sense sort of stuff, masks.
Yeah, sure.
Now, I am not a believer in the surgical masks at all. I think they are a joke. I could be completely wrong on that, but the holes in the side where you as you walk past someone and you can see their mouth, it screams that it's not doing anything.
Yep.
Up here in Queensland, it's actually not you've got to just wear a face covering is the language used. So a piece of fabric across your mouth or not even just across your mouth is fine. And it's just, I don't know, it's like we're not sneezing in each other's mouth. This isn't doing anything.
No, we're not. This whole issue of face masks, look, it comes down to this ventilation, vocalization, how long you're spending in contact with people who are potentially contaminated, and how many people are clustered together. They're the sort of four criteria about, infection transmission and the probability of becoming infected. And this issue with masks is a real dilemma. Personally, for me, it's been a big personal issue because obviously I use masks professionally, but I use a half face respirator, from the safety store with guaranteed particulate arresting ability and, toxic gas arresting ability. So I use these commonly. So I know they work. And if I take off my glasses, put contact lenses in, I can move to a full face respirator and I can be very happy in a very toxic environment. So moving into COVID, my bias was that masks work. But if they're used effectively and if it's the right quality mask, do I use a medical mask in someone's water damaged building home? Never.
That's one of those surgical blue masks that everyone's wearing, right? Yep.
Do I use a N95 mask? Sometimes. So moving into coronavirus, I thought, they've got their place. I'm all for this. People should wear masks because I guess it will protect them. And I didn't think further than that. In fact, I didn't go looking for the research other than I found some early research showing that if you salt with normal table salt, the front of the mask, that if someone coughs at you with liquid droplets containing virus, that it will deactivate it. And I thought, this is fantastic. We should be treating all our MERV filters in recycled, in your home that uses recycling as a way of cycling, heating or cooling in your home. Why don't we salt them all? We'll reduce all types of infections. Well, I did that in my home. And the problem is that you then can feel the salt in the air and it stings your eyes. So obviously I got the concentration wrong, but I didn't really look at this mask research at all carefully because I just thought, it must work. It probably works. But then we accelerate towards the end of 2020. You're starting to hear about people who have worn their face masks and have gotten COVID. People, doctors saying, we only wear these in these situations. Then we start hearing about the massive pollution, which you can see on the sidewalk. Early in 2020, I started taking a few random photographs of discarded face masks. So I have changed my opinion. I've then changed it back again. So sometimes I'm for it. Sometimes I'm against it. I think that had I been in decision-making capacity for whether we wear masks or not, I would have been sitting down with a bunch of experts and saying, let's get all the publications here. Let's work this stuff out and let's find a, like you were saying about risk of acquisition of illness to certain behaviors that people have followed and not followed. There should have been like a low, medium, high, but mandating this and the fact that all of us keep our masks in our back pocket or ladies' handbags or in the car. The reality is that this is not a great idea. And I think that for every person who has used a mask, it is definitely a division between myself and you. I think
Mhm.
that even last night there was something online showing that a behavioral psychologist had done a study of that person's psychology class, looking at whether or not the kids in the psychology class found other individuals more or less attractive wearing a face mask. So the PR release, the messaging from the university was that the students found those wearing a face mask more attractive than those not wearing a face mask. Now, the tweet went into some length debunking this, showing that in fact it was just the messaging that the university released, that the actual behavioral psychologist who did the study never said that at all. And
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
so the reality is that we then come back to the first point I made, that this is a division between people. And as you limit interpersonal connection and loss of facial recognition and putting a barrier, you are creating serious fear. And this fear leads to paranoia and concern and self-doubt. And that leads to anxiety. Anxiety over time leads to stress. This is, there's public health disaster. So again, if people want to wear a mask, go for it, but they shouldn't be fined for not wearing it. And they shouldn't be ridiculed if they do become ill for the fact that, oh, you mustn't have worn your mask, or you must be one of those dirty anti-vaxxers. And so that brings into this segregation issue. So the masks define barrier, loss of identity, separation, segregation, inability to have personal choice and free will, and our freedom is slowly being eroded. And so your point about masks is mission critical to what we're talking about today, because we're all being told that we might have to wear them for years. And I know what happens when I go into the local store with and without it. And sometimes I put it on simply because I just couldn't be bothered even making a second glance at someone. And do I really care about their opinion? Maybe not, but why should I make their day shit?
Yeah.
But I'm buying into the fact that I'm limiting my behavior because I don't want them to feel bad. Where in reality, we just
it should be the other way around.
Totally.
Yeah. Yes. So you sort of just touched on it there, but all the secrecy, it seems to be secret with science of the last 2 years. Like science has come from being a process, and now it is it's a thing. It's settled. The science is settled. You hear it all the time. Yeah. And I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor of any description, but I was always taught that science is a process. Yeah. And it always gets questioned and tested, and now it isn't. And what the hell happened there? Why? How did that happen?
This issue of I'll tell you how I can answer that. The people are very quick to say the more left-leaning people are all on board with diversity. And the right-leaning people are moving towards conservatism. The problem with science is that certainly when I was going through the university system, the whole mantra was we need multidisciplinary teams. We need people with different viewpoints to, as you say, build the hypotheses, build the testable questions, set up experiments that are richer from having involvement with people with different disciplines. And the sensible vice chancellors and deans and people with the ability to coordinate new research initiatives recognize that diversity of thought in science particularly is very valuable. The problem is that scientists don't go out to the bank to withdraw money to fund their research. They need to convince their group, their heads of department, their heads of school, their heads of division, and so on up, that either they have time released to build the grant, write the grant, and secure the funding. The problem is that the people making the decisions about the funding are often somewhat removed from the bench practice of doing science. And they may be totally intelligent and capable and rational, but they may be somewhat removed. And the longer you're removed from practicing your skill, you become more a theoretician rather than a practitioner. And the problem with this is that this mainstream narrative has naturally flowed on from the fact that those who make funding decisions are, in a sense, more along their daily life is more bureaucratic in process anyway. And so the flow-on effects of science not taking advantage of diversity of thought and opinion and practice hasn't been any different to people applying for grants. But in future, which is definitely going to happen, science at the small and the micro and the macro scale for building a country that takes advantage of its science is going to need to involve people definitely with strong engineering backgrounds. This can't just be the domain of scientists with very clear, defined, rigid niches. You need engineers who understand and have a different way of thinking. And that doesn't mean that you just have one of them. You need a lot of them. You also need people. It's great that the universities have embraced psychology and sociology and and have turned these disciplines into much stronger numerate disciplines. But you need engineers. Without engineers, you can't do science at a large scale, because those individuals understand and recognize when something doesn't work, it needs fixing, and that a theoretical fix isn't going to work. And so I see the role of engineering in science significantly improving. It needs to. Had engineers been brought into the dialogue around public health, we'd be a lot saner in this country. Similarly, I know a range of people with practical trade skills that are so capable of solving problems because they understand that they can look at a problem and look at what's at their disposal to address it and come up with a meaningful solution, not next month, but right this second now. We need that, because way too many people, like this SAGE document that's front and center on my mind, or was 2-3 weeks ago. This is a theoretical approach to a practical problem, which has been rewritten and released to the public with too many cooks spoil the cuisine, essentially. And I'm sick of it. And I think the public is sick of it too. I think people want to see solutions that are practical and they're verifiable in their own lives. And we need a lot more people sitting back on the couch at night and on the weekend and going, oh yeah, science does work. It's not all misleading us. And we need some wins in this country. It's the only way forward for public messaging health. And also, if a country wants to develop sensible solutions to practical problems, you're going to need to get some people with skills outside. And I'm just not sure how this is going to happen, because people don't want to invite the diversity of thought that is so prominent in the corporate world, but seems completely lost in the mainstream science that we're being fed. Because if they did have that diversity of thought there, we wouldn't be getting these panacea-like solutions and told, accept it or else.
Is that an issue, like in universities, like being so insulated? So as it goes. I know we're not quite as far down the road as, say, America is, but I mean, like, people go through uni, they stay in the uni, and then they teach what they got taught at uni. Is this part of the issue, or no outside influence? Is it?
I am not sure how to answer that. My experience at university was 17 years working at a university. It's not that long in retrospect, it is when you're 20.
Yeah.
The reality is that the hierarchy of the university and what the senior people consider important on how to create a network of, lucky, intelligent people who are really lucky to be at university and do that job. It's like, it's pure luck if your world allows you to follow your curiosity and intuition, and in a sense build your brain at the expense of making anything. You make thinking and write it down. That is just an unbelievably lucky position to be in. So I think that those vice chancellors who decide to mold that and take their life experience and say, look, we can allow certain groups and individuals to flourish here, really win out at the end. But I don't know what's gone wrong. And what I hear out of Australian universities and the US universities in terms of limiting thinking and limiting ways of thinking on campus is just terrible. So it sounds terrifying to me. And look, I'm not at the university now, so I don't know. But what I read about academics being cautioned for their thinking that may not be publicly consistent with the government messaging is the absolute wrong approach to a university. Universities should be encouraging free thought. If they've got radical thinkers, great. They need more radical thinkers. If the other academics don't like it, those individuals that are mouthing off, or usually academics are very cautious. They support their thinking with the thinking of others, and so it is unlikely that you will have unconstrained radicalism or in a sense deliberate attempts to take apart or destabilize the institution. Most academics believe in the value of the institution or the university, and it dismays me that vice chancellors, essentially because they're begging for handouts from the government, are don't have the strength of character to stand up for their universities and their staff.
You see, that's a real issue too. If they do stand up, what funding's going to be cut? Is there going to be a university in another 5 years if they do start doing that? And that's the biggest issue that I have with a lot of things.
And look at the old TAFE situations in Australia. Vocational education and the deregulation and moving towards private colleges, which were essentially, and I'm all for people setting up and running private vocational education. But in a sense, the universities have lost all those golden opportunities, and they've now gone into private industry. And then the media seizes on the one or two private colleges that maybe do the wrong thing. So there's just all sorts of chaos in terms of the different types of education that people need. People don't necessarily need 3, 4, 5, 6 year degrees. YouTube and social media prove to us that you can acquire knowledge in smaller chunks, and universities and educational institutions have proven themselves to be agile, and the teachers have proven that they can take advantage of digital technology. But the thing is that if the thinking is becoming more and more and more narrow and restricted because it may offend someone, well, what was the whole point?
Yes, absolutely. It's funny that you brought up that word radical, radical thinkers and all that sort of stuff, because I'm sure a lot of people, our conversation right now would be classed as radical by a lot of people.
Oh, probably. But look, there's a huge difference between a punk approach to overthrowing government and a public conversation about topics that affect many members and different strata in society. And we need the ability to be able to speak freely without fear that our thoughts or views are going to be punished, because that's the antithesis of a democracy. And the crowd theoretically makes the decision at the end of the day. But unfortunately now the crowd is being told how to think and what to think. And that's a massive problem.
Yes, it is. Massive problem. All right, so I'm going to wrap you up here and let you go.
Yeah, that's right.
So where can we find you? Your podcast, what's it called? I know you're on Instagram, Facebook, but all your handles. We'll cover those. And
okay.
Shoot.
Look, I used to be active on Instagram, less so now. I'm active on Twitter. All my social media handles are essentially the same. It's at Dr. Cameron Jones, which is DrCameronJones. Obviously, my company, biologicalhealthservices.com.au, and all information about myself is at drcameronjones.com. They're the main ways that people can get into contact with me. I am active on Facebook, but less so than before. And I'm increasingly active on all of the alt socials. I think that everyone needs to be. And also this issue that we really haven't touched on very much about echo chambers. People consider the alt socials as echo chambers or aggregators for left or right thinking individuals. The reality is that all social media platforms offer an environment and tools with which to communicate with other individuals. They are not just information pushing, they're information receiving as well. A lot of them all do use some sort of algorithms to decide what you should consume, but increasingly the alt socials are not limiting you to receiving certain types of information, and that's the whole value of the alt social network. So for the last 15 years, and certainly since the evolution of MySpace into Facebook, we weren't to know that the echo chamber algorithm effect was going to be disadvantageous when COVID came around, because it made sense. If you're into football, I want to see more stories about football. That makes sense. It's just like the favorite parts of the library when you were a kid, or the favorite magazines that you used to read, or the favorite, collector's cards. It makes sense that you're going to go with your interests. But I think now, with censorship of information, and certainly of the news media becoming a very real threat to democratic thought, the rise of the alternative social media is more important than ever. And so, I've got a few followers on a few of the new alt socials. Like, I don't care. I want to be a participating member of those communities, small as they are. And, because it's for our own, self-preservation of our freedom of thinking and our freedom to access information, because we don't go to the newsagent anymore because there aren't magazines published. We don't go to the local municipal library because they're not well funded to acquire all the digital offerings that are out there. And if we rely on Amazon or rely on the TV news as the only way of acquiring information, then we're in real trouble moving forward. So
completely agree. You'd be misinformed, not just ill-informed.
So that's where you'll find me.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, speaking of the alt sites, though, I used to be on Parler. I really enjoyed Parler. And I've talked to a few people at work, and they're like, "Oh, isn't it just full of right-wing Trump supporters?" And I'm like, "No, I just didn't friend those people on that platform, and I don't see them." Right. Yeah. So, like you were saying, with the corporate media, they push a certain narrative that things like Parler was right wing, and all of a sudden that's all you'll see on there. But it's just not true. It's unfortunate now that it's been taken off the Play Store and whatnot. You can still sideload it, but it's not as easy. It's not convenient or anything. And that's a real form of censorship that I'm not. I don't like it. I don't think it's right. And like you were saying, in any democracy like we're meant to be in, the better ideas are meant to win the day, not the ones that are pushed by whoever's in charge at the time.
Well, look, I 100% agree with you. And look, I'll wrap this up for our chat today, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. Yep. I read something about podcasts apropos of the Joe Rogan recent interviews and the removal of some of those interviews online. And this is certainly not my thinking, but I'll just paraphrase what I read, that the value of or the fear that the mainstream media have around podcasting is that it is difficult to censor, and that it is very, very difficult to in advance decide to cancel something, and that it is far less controllable than other forms of media. So I like that idea, because it's sort of, we're ending where we started, that conversations between humans is how we exchange information. And somewhere along the line in history, the news media cycle and press became fundamentally important, and they still are, but they are losing traction as they become far less egalitarian. And none of us want to read stories written where it is 100% 50-50 on every single topic. And I understand that is journalistic principle and integrity, but we need commentary on the information as well. And so I think that maybe the US have really pushed the envelope in pushing opinion, but there's a place for that. And we do need people to be free thinkers and as I said earlier, not persecuted for their views. And the sooner we move towards that world, the better. And so these old socials are going to rise.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you very much, mate. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Love to talk to you. I will talk to you again. I hope we'll chat again too.
Yeah, for sure we will. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay.